I'm here with my friend and producer, Christopher Juul. This is the man who has produced my album Loose in 2015. Um, Done everything from arranging, writing, mixing, recording, and mastering, and has taken me through that process as a solo artist to record an album for the first time. And yeah, you really guided me through that. And that's why I think it's super interesting for people who are into Nordic music in general, who listen to this genre, who listen to this album so much, to also hear a little bit more from you about how we made it, and me, looking back on that time. I just listened myself this morning again. I haven't heard the record for a while, and the first thing I noticed is that it sounds like we could have made it yesterday. Like the production quality is so high that it sounds still like super fresh, actually. So I think that's a really good sign when it doesn't feel immediately aged of sorts. But yeah, okay. So
That's what we aim at, right? Also, when we make music, we want to make it timeless, right? We want to make experiences that, doesn't get aged, in a bad way, at least, right?
yes,
Um, and also, you know, creating you as a solo artist, like getting you to a point where I remember the early Leaf stuff, as it was called back then,
yes,
was more like a communal project. And I think you, with this album, really took it, from being that into something that you could carry on your own as
yeah,
as an independent artist, right?
yes,
Um, and that I think, in many ways also defined a little bit. I think that the path that you continued on, right, with your newer stuff also.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm very proud of that. I was actually getting the other day how Facebook comes with like a picture, like you remember that day, and
Yeah.
one of them that came up with me was me sitting with the demo of it, like once
Yeah,
not the demo, like the actual master, but it was
yeah.
just like a white CD with the name on LYS,
Like the first
and
print.
you can see like the paw of my cat at the time sitting right
Oh,
next to it. Yeah, it was kind of a nice memory.
yeah. It was a really, really, really special time. I feel like also a little bit of a luxurious time because we were able to really go into a bubble at the time to record. Like I was there day and night because, of
Mm,
course, I live in a different country. So you come
mm,
for a set of a few days or a
mm.
week, and to
Yeah.
have the luxury of really immersing yourself
Mm.
at the time there with you was really, I think, also what helped this record a lot.
Yeah,
Uh,
and my studio is what you call a destination studio, right? It's
yes.
not like not laying anywhere near anything, So, and also
No.
it's a specialized studio in a certain type of music. So obviously, people have to travel there, and you know live there, and then
Yeah,
become a part of it, right?
exactly. And I think that's actually one of the best experiences one can have.
Mm,
There's many ways, of course, to record your music and working with studios, but
mm,
for me, this was paramount, I think, to
mm,
be able to, already having had a good friendship with you, but
mm.
to be able to have that
Yeah,
on
and
yeah,
and I mean the whole thing. I think doing historical inspired music and um, or tapping into that nerve of things. I always like to think that to be able to reconnect with the past, you have to disconnect for the now, right?
yes,
And
yeah,
and that idea of being in one place and not having to go back in between, and having to get your mind distorted basically from whatever is going on in the real life is super important, and something that I also developed further with uh, in the 10 years since,
exactly. Yeah,
Mm.
going like a full immersive periods of time to make
Yeah.
magic, basically.
Mm.
That brings me actually to one of the first questions by Adam Mike. It's such a big question in a way. Where do
Mm.
you best start with a record that has so many layers and musicians? And that I translate a little bit also like what is the best place to start for making a record, and
Mm.
how we did that with Luz. was
Okay,
kind
so
of
first of all, we actually don't have that many musicians on the album, right?
exactly,
We have some guests, but we actually play most of the things ourselves, right?
exactly. Yeah.
And so I think first of all, like from the view of the producer, now I am also, of course, a
Yes.
composer, as probably everyone knows by now. But
Mhm.
I think an album starts with an idea
Yeah.
inside of you that is true, right? And that becomes your platform, right? And in the case of LYS, you had a quite, I think you had a quite visual idea on where you want to take the album, right? And I think once you establish that platform, it's about creating the layers of an onion around it and just add more and more complexity. Like you start with a basic shape when moldering, like for instance, a clay figure, right? You start with the very basic shapes, and then you go in further with the detailing. But it will always be defined by that initial shape that you create, and direction, right? And a job for me as a producer is also to very quickly establish what is the purpose you want to tell, what is the story you're telling, and then also keep the artist on a story. Some artists are easier to keep to that than others. I think this was a easy one. Of course, we were very aware what we wanted to do, but of course there's a million ways to get there, right?
Yeah.
So like you can also look at it that when you are writing an album, of course it can be diffuse exactly how detailed and exactly how it's gonna end up being. So in a way you're feeling your way through the mist in a way to get to a place, but I mean, you are working towards an end goal that you have determined in a way. But there is, of course, a layer of chaos getting there. That is the travel of making an album, right?
Yeah.
And that's why working with one producer to another, that can, of course, shape that differently, right? Um, but the end goal is the same.
Absolutely. And I feel if I remember, not only with Loose, but also with the singles we did after, with you, you really want to know what you want to tell as an artist. Like
Mm,
that is something you actually really inquire about. You talk
mm,
with the artists about the
mm,
ideas behind the song or the
mm,
image they have or the emotions, So that is
mm,
such a good thing to be aware of before you, like an onion, indeed, like
mm,
on other layers or start to weave in other patterns. The core idea,
mm.
that is what you first inquired about.
Yeah, and also it's kind of the determiner in terms of um, if I want to work with an artist, right?
Yeah.
What is your story? What is it you want to tell, right?
Yes.
If an artist would start telling me I want to sound like this, and that artist, they're not even gonna open the door to the studio, right?
Yeah.
I want people that has something real to say, right?
Yeah.
Um, and 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 yeah, because this is what the world needs, right? Like honest
Yeah.
people telling real stories, right?
Yeah.
And there's ways to do that in any art form, and um, this is why we do historic music also, right? We have histories, stories to tell, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And
That's one of
yeah,
the missions. Yeah.
mm,
I,
yeah,
I, I feel now, if I look back at least, the ideas were so raw. Like I
mm,
sometimes only had a little bit of text that I
mm,
had a melody idea about,
yeah. We did a
and
lot of development there. Yeah, I
we
remember.
did a lot of development.
Mm,
You did a lot of development, but by letting me sing those ideas or talk with those ideas
mm,
to you, and then you were like, that's there, we're
mm,
gonna take it,
mm,
let's develop the BPM, the rhythm,
mm,
develop the song from there. Nowadays, I do more like my own pre-productions, but it's something that
mm,
I had to learn because when I did Loose, I didn't
mm,
have any clue yet. You really showed me
mm,
what a record recording is even about.
mm.
Now, if you would talk to an artist or a band, is it something you would prefer to have like more fully crafted pre-productions ready? Or do you actually like it when it's still in such a raw shape, a song, and you can still
I
develop
mean,
together?
uh, it depends on the story, you know. I've been awfully busy lately.
Yeah. Yeah.
with my own stories.
How much time do
Uh,
you have? Yeah. It's the
oh,
realistic
yeah,
answer.
we're gonna have a break in August, so that's gonna be nice.
Yeah.
So that will be open up for some more. But I mean, uh, well, time is of course the thing, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think there is a rule necessarily how the shape is. If I like the story, I like the story, right?
Yeah.
Um, it depends also how much time there is, there is for making a thing like this, right? Because developing something from scratch in studio is, of course, more costly and time consuming than
Yes.
than doing the homework. But I would say I don't think I've ever tried to make an album where everything was just completely settled in stone.
No.
Once the thing, my studio is a project studio after all. It's meant to develop, music, right? It's
Yeah.
not just press record and then, launch and then we mix and that's it, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it is a project studio where artists can come in and tell a story and we develop it together, and that has been like always like this. And I think actually you were very well prepared in what you wanted to feel with the thing, right? And you also have had your start melodies and stuff like that we could then build on, right?
Yeah.
And I think that in many ways is more than enough, I think, to start a project, right?
Yeah. So the advice would be at least, yeah, of course, don't come completely unprepared.
No, 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 of course not.
Have your story, have your vision, have your, your melodic sketches and ideas,
Mm,
your lyrics.
mm,
That brings me to another question of Siren. I love the whole album of LYS. I'm spellbound by the song Rán and was wondering if you create lyrics first or come up with the music after. And
I think that's a question for you, definitely.
in my case, that's also it's a little bit relevant for working with you
Mm,
because I love to nowadays write the lyrics first. And when I do, I sometimes come with 2 pages of text, like we did in
mm,
Blockbilio or Unnar Mind Pitch. And it completely changes actually the way we worked with song structure or arrangement, making it,
mm,
I think, a little bit more atypical because I'm really tying myself more to the text that sort of already has a melody in there by writing it
mm,
out and following that idea more. And then it's not a typical song structure. It can be like with Blood Billion. We
mm,
made a song of 15 minutes. It's more like like an
mm.
EP that
Yeah,
just
yeah.
flows through these different segments of text.
Mm,
And you really helped like craft that beautifully with, okay, we put this there and there, rearranging this idea with me that I brought in.
mm,
Yeah, with Loose, sometimes we had actually really strong melodies up front, like with
mm,
Mimonen, or the cover. Yeah, cover. It's written by Maria Frans of Vinda to
mm.
re-record that again. So for
I
it,
think if you go back to Ran,
yeah,
I think Ran at the time became more important than we initially knew when we were
yeah,
making it, because it kind of also became your a kind of an indicator on where you would go as an artist in general and what you will be gravitating towards, which is the
yeah,
sea, right? And
yes,
and the deity that guards that sea, and that feminine power that is in that too, right?
yes,
And it became your artist name,
yeah, yeah,
and and in many ways that really became the platform of the album, right?
yeah,
That became that light, which loose means that light beacon for you,
yeah,
to gravitate towards. And also this the singles we were doing together later, or like the EP pieces, or
yeah,
however we want to call it, is completely immersed in water, right?
exactly.
That
Yeah.
that is uh, clear to see.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and I think that song was important, and I also think we did a lot of process on it also. We tried different versions also, I remember.
Yeah.
While other songs were, of course, like Maria's Winter song was easier to do because there is already a phases on how it should be, right?
It's carved out. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. I think I think the Rán piece is interesting in terms of it kind of built you as an artist.
Yeah, I feel so too. I really remember when you created the intro of that song where we were actually discussing wanting to make the movement of the sea with
Mm,
vocals. And pretty blindly, you put me in the vocal booth and really phrase by phrase helped guide me through the
mm,
recording of that. And
mm,
you clearly had a vision there, like I'm gonna layer it like that.
mm.
And then we can
Yeah.
create these waves of the sea just with the voice. And I was
Mm,
just like, what are we doing? I
mm.
think it's gonna be great. Hearing what you made with that directly after, and you were processing still a
Yeah.
lot.
So what you're talking about there is also like a thing many artists experience when producing and also developing, right? Is
Yeah.
that there's this free fall place where you're like, okay, I'm just gonna go with the flow, right?
Yeah.
And that is actually essentially a very important part of making art is allowing yourself, to just jump into it without knowing, right?
Yeah.
Because art can be its own thing. It can be something that you wish to control strictly, right? And
Mhm.
the result of that can be contrived sometimes, right? While if you let the art, just blossom and do whatever it like, and you just try to take care of it and guide it a little bit in the right direction, it becomes alive, like in
Yes.
a very animistic way, right?
Yeah.
It becomes its own creature, right? And of course, everyone that works with what we do knows about Ran and the myth around it and all that. So for me, it was clear that we needed the element in it. But it's very easy to just put a sample or recording or whatever of the ocean, right? And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that is can be cool also, right? But I thought that since it was such a personal thing for you, it was good to have you in it, right? And
Mm.
being on the ocean is chaotic, right?
Yeah.
We think we can control our ships through the ocean, but we are completely in the ocean's power, right? When we're there,
Yes.
and I think that feeling came through a little bit with
Yeah.
your vocal work there.
Absolutely. There's actually a technical question about Ran also made by Luna Luz. That's funny. This last name is also Luz. Would you mind to share, Christopher, how did you make the vocal delays and reverb, especially in Ran, the layering of the delay in Prelude? I don't know if you use Prelude. Sounds so good.
Prelude, as in the is in the, I think they mean the intro, probably not
Yeah.
not the software.
No, no.
Uh, well, yeah, well, I do a lot. I can say that in
Yeah.
general, like it would be kind of interesting to tell the whole chain. I would actually have to sit with the session in front of me
Yeah.
to know exactly. But um, I believe we made the album in Cubase, as far as I remember. We never used really software, like the built-in software effects at all. A lot of the effects you hear in general is impulse responses. It's a technique that work by you can go to an actual space in real life. It can be a cave, a tunnel, mountain range, whatever place that has a natural reverberation or echo. And you can record this with a so-called sweep. So you bring a speaker that can produce a sweep sound, going from very high frequencies to very low, and that will send a wave of sound through this space. And then when you place microphones, which in nowadays immersive stuff, if we're going to talk about more about that, it's even more exciting. But in this particular case, it's a stereo recording of that place of at different locations at spaces
Yeah.
that then records the sweep, and you can remove that sweep from the recording, and what you're left with is an algorithm that can recreate digitally that reverb of that real space
Yeah.
on an album.
Yeah.
And that is how I work the most. I like the chaotic sound of real spaces. We
Yeah.
do obviously have very real reverbs in the studio too. We use an actual EMT plate reverb, which is a very old invention that you hear on old Beatles and Moody Blues albums quite a
Yeah.
lot. We have a spring reverb, of course. We have tape echoes, and we have digital lexicon echoes and reverbs and all these things.
Yeah.
But I gravitate. I have a gravitate towards real spaces, and that is because like with recordings, we don't really use synthesizers or sample sounds at all. We create everything ourselves. We might put it on a grid, but we create everything ourselves. And by by using real spaces on top of this, you get that chaoticness that an algorithm will never make for you.
Yeah.
That's just something very sterile in reverbs that is perfect
Yeah.
because no room in the real world or ambience in any natural surrounding is real. Um,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
so that is kind of the logic behind it. But the actual change, I mean, it's 10 years ago. I made a lot of albums
It's a
since then.
while ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I loved to have seen that also as an artist sitting, next to you when you were working on these things,
Mm,
that you were like having these impulse responses
mm,
places, creating this insane chaotic,
mm,
natural, animistic kind of reverb.
mm,
I think, yeah, especially for the intro of Ran, you were talking about plate reverb, like the analog stuff you have. I think
mm.
you also have used some of that on my strings on the nickelharpa
Yeah.
in that song, didn't you? And also
No.
Suurin. Yeah,
Mm,
because I have, if it's okay, we jump to the song Suurin for a moment because there were a lot
sure.
of questions about it. Uh,
Okay.
it's been like unexpectedly the hit song, or like the song that
Mm.
had the most views and streams and the
It's
most
the
like.
song of the million D-essers also because there's
Yeah,
so many S's in that song. I remember. I think I tested like 10, 16 D-essers because it's so on spot with S's right on top, and
yeah.
you don't want to sound it like you're lisping through the whole thing,
And
right? Either, right?
I have already a weakness
Mm.
there with any
Yeah.
vocal recording or anything I do, that I have to watch.
I'm most happy if you have this close mic stuff, right? But I mean that is fine, and it also it's just the style to be eyes sharp, on beat
Yeah.
and everything. But man, I got to try some DSs on that song for sure.
Yeah.
That is cool. I mean,
Yeah.
uh, I would wish back then that I have some of the stuff that I have now because that would just be a press of a button and I would be happy with my day, right?
Wow.
But
Yeah.
back then we didn't really have any natural sounding DSs to my
Yeah.
liking at least, right?
Yeah.
So we had to invent quite a stuff, and then I think I ended up doing most of the docking of the S's manually and really just like place them exactly where I wanted it.
Word by
And
word. Yes.
yeah, and I like it.
Yeah.
It gives its own human touch that any automated process would never be able to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Yeah, that song in particular, especially with that Karelian language, it has so much S's.
Yeah, it's
Well,
insane.
you already answered like almost the first question. Wild Soul Tribe asks, what challenges did we have when recording Suurin? So I think that's a good answer already to that one. And the other one from Stefan was, how did you make Suurin? Explain the chemistry you have gone through.
Okay, so there was also the fact that we added Kai and Maria to the track. You
Yeah.
know, we were in the very early stages of Heilung at the time.
Mm.
Um, it's before we did Lifa, as far as I remember. We were still building. I think we had released
I
our
had a
own
few.
version of Ofni at the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wasn't it in around there? Yeah.
Same time. Yeah.
So of course, a studio is a community, right? It still is.
Yeah.
Now it's grown quite a lot bigger, but it is a community of people coming by. We hang out together and stuff like that. And of course, Kai and Maria also had their daily walks there.
Yeah.
And we're just like, hey, we need some droney, screamy stuff. Kai, can you come in? And
Yeah.
he did that. And then we added, I think it was a one take from Maria,
It
just
was
giving her primal singing on top
a
of it,
locker song. Yeah.
doing her Maria thing on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that became really nice. I mean,
Yeah.
I it became kind of like a handshake between the early Heilung and also the early Rán, right?
Yeah, and at the time
And that makes it very unique.
exactly, because at the time Heilung was still like in its primal development. It had just released Ofnir on
Mm.
Bandcamp, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just like a self-release.
Yeah, self-released. And I remember like asking Kai, can you, like sort of invoke that wolf spirit that we are talking
Mm.
about, this hamram, this like
Mm.
shape-shifting core idea behind the song. And he just went for it like
Mm.
the type of person he is, like really like almost like the wolf and the three piggies, like blow the house in.
Mm.
It went more and more and more. Like there was one
And then you had like that video you made afterwards, like running through
through the woods,
the yeah,
yeah, in the
yeah,
snow.
yeah,
3 days of
with a
snow
camera
running.
that almost hit you, right, or something like
Yeah.
that.
Oh my God. Oh, that video. I loved it, but
Yeah.
it was really also the dogs were constantly outrunning the video.
Mm.
So we were
Good shape afterwards, right?
it
I
was
mean,
yeah, yeah. It was good for my condition. It was fun.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mostly was just a lot of fun. I
No, no, we
love
have to suffer for
challenges.
art, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love challenges like that. And exactly for those who are like such a big fan of this song, it was for Maria, it was a one take. It was
Mm.
really, she went full out. And
Mm.
I remember sitting, like behind you on the couch in the recording booth, and you were like, tuck, okay, that's it, Maria. It was
Mm.
perfect. And she
Yeah,
was,
but that is
I
also her
need to do
force, right?
one
We
more.
also we we we,
No,
we I mean we see it in also in Heilung, like an Immersion or
yeah,
Gelgelder or several other songs where we just say, "Here's the feeling, Maria, just
yeah,
go for it," right?
yeah,
And then she just does her thing, right? As she
exactly.
also does there. And and
Yeah,
and and for me, that is the chaos I really like, because we have set the stage, we have set the mood, we know where the song is
yeah,
going, and now you get a talent in, to shape, you know, their interpretation of
yes,
it's kind of like also when you work with a film team or something like that, you kind of give your art to someone to, expand your universe,
yeah.
so to say, right?
It's
That's what I love having guests on, right?
Yeah, it's a trust card, but also
Mm.
giving people like the carpet or the
Mm.
space to show their own talents and let go indeed.
Mm.
Like the art is created in that moment
Mm.
instantaneously by having sort of the surrounding circumstances
Mm.
uh optimized so that
Mm.
you can just go, and in this case, having that community sort of space with your studio, it was very it was very low threshold.
Mm.
Like they were
Mm.
they were at home. So it
Yeah.
it was literally like it was just so
Mm.
easy to have that trust and for Kai to enter that wolf state of mind and for
Mm.
Maria to do her her talented
Mm.
lockups. So it was really great. I have another question. It's a short one, I think, to answer because you already answered a little bit. I would like to know what DAW you use to complete your amazing idea, asks Brumbasse to you.
I
Uh,
want to state that it really doesn't matter what DAW you're using, because
yeah,
just don't use any built-in stuff. Figure out your own chain.
yeah,
But I primarily work personally in Cubase, just because that is what I've known, and it's also kind of the oldest DAW. We still have, like, in the studio, we have a Mac 1 with the old Cubase on it, which is in black and white, and it needs to render like 20 minutes before it can play and stuff like that. It's kind of fun, but else. You know, there's no really rule on what's most of the software can do the same, right?
yeah,
It's just where the buttons are arranged and what works for your workflow.
yeah,
We do have Logic, Cubase, Reverb, Reason, Pro Tools installed. Of course, we have Luna, which is a newer thing now.
yeah,
Um, and I mainly Ableton will also have. We have all these things because when we have artists coming with sessions, right? They
yeah,
they can come with different sessions, and we might even sit and work with some of the basic stuff in whatever session they start out with, just to maybe clean out some edits or whatever, figure out the logic behind the the productions they're trying to or the pre-productions they're trying to achieve. But I usually end in in
you guys.
Cubase,
Yeah,
and that is because I personally like that a thing sounds the same every time I reopen the thing.
Yeah.
And to my experience, that is where Cubase really shines compared to other software.
Oh,
But I'm in
that's
no way endorsed by them. It's just
yeah.
what I work in.
It's your
You
experience.
can
Yeah.
definitely make a fine album in hardly any other software.
Yeah. Yeah. For those who want to know, I use now my pre-productions I do in Logic,
Mm.
because yeah, I started out with that and now I'm sort of locked into that because I'm most familiar with it, but it
Mm.
hasn't been like a super conscious choice to choose that at
No,
all.
no.
But for those who want to, like have capture their ideas before they go in a studio, you can use indeed any kind of program as long as you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
the outline.
Or not use tape, and don't use the computer. Use a hard disk recorder, and
Yeah.
record on a Zoom thing. Go to another studio. Really, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
I think like having a studio now where we have almost any plugin in existence that is worth mentioning, and we have an enormous digital cartotheque, and as I've come to a point, right, like the list of plugins is so long, and the list of opportunities within whatever software to work in,
Yeah.
I just get more and more simple in what I do,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Because for me, it's about what is originally there. What is the source? What is the energy? What is the feeling? And very much animistic property of any given sound.
The
And what
soul of
do I
it.
want it
Yeah.
to do? Yeah, what
Yeah.
is the soul? And what do I want it to do? That is the most important question. How we then get there afterwards, that doesn't really matter. You can get there in a million ways, as long as you have an idea on what you want to do and what you want it to feel like. That is the things that no software can give you.
Yeah.
Everything else is just a hammer. Any tool is a hammer. And you can just go hammer away.
Hammer away. Okay, I love that answer so much because it's so true. Like the core idea is really the essence, the soul, and that's what you can, bring into it. But there are some people who would like to know a little bit more about studio gear. There's one, do you have a favorite plugin that you return to in each production and why?
It develops. So over time, there's some I think at the time of LYS, I used a lot of Flux as my go-to software
Yeah,
for EQing and compression. And nowadays, I use primarily FabFilter for these kind of things. Going into immersive today, I use a lot of Altiverb, um, and the like. I also use some homemade stuff, um,
like what?
all sorts of things. But I think I think the most important thing is that I don't really like. For instance, when we tried to make the crazy project lately with Heilung, where we made, for what we know, the biggest immersive festival show,
Mhm.
at least in Europe,
Yeah,
probably in the world, in Roskilde Festival, where we tried to set up a big setting for immersive audio, right? And there we did it in a close collaboration with Maya Sound, and this, they have like a Space Map Go, which is kind of a software to do all these things, right? But
yeah,
that software is kind of made to make stuff move around, right? Which works amazing in a smaller room, but when you scale it up, and the room becomes with 20,000 people or whatever, I don't think, maybe
yeah.
12, I
Was
don't
like
know
an
how many
open
they can
air?
put in there.
Was it
Yeah,
open
it's in a
air?
tent,
Yeah.
the
Okay.
second main station in
Yeah.
Roskilde Festival. You are met with the physics of the real world again, like a hammer, right? Because the delay, like the physical delay for sound to travel from the stage to the end of the tent back to the back speakers where you can make stuff go around, is 1.5 seconds.
Yeah.
Right, so you have to delay that sound 1.5 seconds, and now when it comes back to stage, it's delayed by 3 seconds, right?
Yeah.
And if you try to say, okay, I'm gonna put my snare drum of a drum kit behind the audience, it will be
Yeah.
3 seconds delayed, which is quite a lot in
Yeah.
music, I can tell
Yeah.
you. So sometimes when software is designed for something specific, even, a big PA company like my, it's not always completely usable in the creative. So what we needed to do there, of course, is to figure out stuff that can play in whatever delay we want, right? Such as drones or nature sounds or whatever, and reverbs.
Yeah.
And the same goes for software, right? I personally really hate all these kind of software that is, and I understand why they're built by other content creators.
Yeah.
I'm not dissing anyone specific here, right? I think people that work with it once in a while feels a little bit cheated when they buy these plugins from famous producers, right? Where it has all this weird more twang button or a little roof or more boom or whatever thing they call it in the plugins, right? And it's basically basic plugins behind with presets that has a button, right? And you're not gonna be, well famous buying these plugins and all of a sudden have by magic the perfect sounding thing with that, right?
Yes.
Because it's actually just a preset for a workflow for a completely different producer, right? And you don't want to sound like that producer, right? In fact, you want to sound like yourself, right?
Exactly.
So all these emulations of real things is still just software. It's not a real tape warmth or whatever you want to call it, or tube saturation you are having in your software. It's not real. It is
Yeah.
still software. So
Yeah.
if you want the tube sound on something, get a tube. You might not need it. Maybe the sound is great enough by itself, right? So what I'm saying is that, you know, be very careful with thinking that, oh, and now I use the same thing as this other the dude or girl or whatever. Um, uh, because there's a million EQ plugins that can do the same thing, you
Yes.
know,
Yeah.
and like DAWs, and there's a million compressors, right? My advice is to see what color you like, right? But keep a long way from this preset stuff and artist series and stuff like that. Find something that is simple that works for your workflow. Figure out what you're missing by maybe is it too sharp? Do I need to saturate something? Do I need to have something that give that color I like? And that can be both found in the digital realm or in the box realm, basically,
Yeah.
or in the real world, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's your instrument that sucks, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe it's your room that sucks, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people, they buy a microphone for thousands and thousands of euros, and then they put it in a room that sounds like shit. And now you have something that is really good at capturing a room that sounds like shit,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
It would be way better to use fewer money on a relatively cheap microphone that can still kind of record the area, maybe even mask the stuff that is problematic in your room, and then use the rest of your money on making the room and, of course, the instrument in it sound good.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you can't beat real. If the recording is shit from beginning, you can try to make it
Yeah.
sound real and good, but it will never be good.
Exactly. So basically what you're saying is start also at the root, like make the
Mm,
recording good in the first place, the room, the
mm,
instrument. I noticed, for example, if I have to home record my nickel harpa for something, it really matters what the tension of my bow is. I think a lot of bow string players, they will understand this. It really determines the sound. So if I want to
definitely.
amplify
Even what harpics you're using.
exactly, I
Mm.
have to loosen the string a little bit so it relaxes onto the rest. But so yeah,
You
knowing
can go even further, right?
yeah.
How are you feeling when you're recording, right? Many people, they would spend, again, thousands of euros to go to a fancy studio with a top-notch producer or whatever,
Yeah.
and everything is fancy, and the label has just put out a lot of money for you to go to this place because it's gonna be great. And once you arrive, you're so nervous that you won't be able to record anything,
Yeah.
right? It's also about placing yourself in a situation where you in calm can perform what you like, right?
Mhm.
Of course, nowadays we can do quite a lot from home, and if you are able to do proper acoustics in your room, do that. You
Yeah.
know, and of course, there's a lot of help from a lot of clever people online and stuff like that. But even there, I would argue that you know it's not always the key to make it what you want, right?
Yeah.
So what we see a tendency in production techniques and stuff like that. I do talks about, of course, all these sound stuff
Yeah.
and also teach sometimes.
Mm.
Um, and what I normally say is that it is problematic that that seems to becoming these unofficial standards that has to be followed on different things. Of course, some standards is handy to have in terms of the volume of things. Like the loops for loudness when we deliver in different formats, because there's been set rules by different platforms for these things.
Yeah.
And also, you can't just do whatever you want on a vinyl release, because the needle can actually physically jump off and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And there's also limits to what even a vinyl can play. Uh,
Yeah.
so 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 I mean, of course, we have real limitations on some places, but I do think from an artistic point of view, it's really important that we don't try to sound too much like each other, right? That we find our own way to it in a DIY kind of idea and figure out what feels good to ourselves, because this way
Yeah.
we force ourselves to become different than the others,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Uh, and that is one of the successes of LYS, in my opinion, is that it doesn't sound like anyone else. It
Mm.
sounds exactly like its own thing, right?
Yeah.
And still today that stands out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is because we didn't try to sound like anyone. We just tried to make it sound and feel like the thing we wanted it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God, this was such a valid answer about so many things actually people have been asking,
Mm,
really bringing it back to the root of things. Um, I think it really has to do with how you feel in the space as well. And like we
mm,
did with Luz, like we talked about in the beginning of this chat, having that initial situation where you feel you can fully immerse yourself and express yourself in a
mm,
trusted space, and also
mm,
to let go of perhaps these preconceived notions of I want to sound like that artist, or how
mm,
can I sound, which plugin do I need to sound like Heilung? It's not like
mm.
that. It has to come from a real place first and to sound like yourself. I mean, I think
And
that's
also, don't try to sound like Highland, because you will
exactly,
fail.
exactly. Because there's only one Heilung. It's
Yeah,
it's best to sound like
you.
you, yourself, your soul. And I think that's also maybe, at least for me, it's the case.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's my PA, Martin. He's doing a
Hey,
great job.
Martin. Hi. For me, it's so important to understand that sound and vibration and our breath, our voice, they are an extension of our soul. And so when making
Mm,
music, as we do with historical instruments, in the sphere that we
mm,
do, with the mythology that we work with, even being in that genre or that niche of sound of sorts, you still have your own voice as an artist or as a producer. And that's what you want to amplify, your own soul,
mm.
not someone else's.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's the first thing, I think. Of course, we can be linked in other ways as artists, right?
Yeah.
And going a little bit back to this, if you see, I think a lot of people don't realize how simple Lava Studios was back in the day, by then,
Yeah.
compared to what it is now. It today is probably one of the bigger studios in Denmark, right?
Yeah.
It was definitely not that back then when we made LYS, right? But it's still, of course, developed with the same concept and idea.
Yeah.
But I mean, um, what I liked about the whole thing is that there was, and it still is today, like a community of artists that do have their own door into it. Like for instance, back then you introduced me to a Danish artist called Amalie and
Yeah.
Mirko, which is a good friend of us, and you did a little piece with her with Himlen bliver sort in the old studio, right?
Yeah.
And that brought that whole Nyckelharper element into her music, right?
Yeah.
She then started to become her thing
Yeah.
afterwards, when I also did her folk album in the newer studio.
Mm.
And I just like how also on your album, when like I was from Heilung is on it, and even back then, you seen was also still quite prominent, and some
Yes.
like her.
Yeah.
And we had also um, other stuff going on, and
Yeah.
like you helped a lot making actually. And I don't think many people know this, but like for instance, Maria and me and you also have a lot skill in other things than just music. We do project management and stuff like that. So in the beginning, you were the backbone on the management of making the first Heilung shows
It's
there,
a long time ago. Yeah.
right? Yeah. But
Yeah.
I mean,
It was a lot of
not
emails.
many people know that how important it is as an artist to be able to stand on your own feet and do
Yeah.
things, right? And it's
Yeah.
part of the art to actually know how to organize yourself and make that work, right?
Yeah.
We did the same, like we still do the same in Heilung this day. We are we of course we have collaborators like you also do with your projects, but we are still self-managed, right? We are still like driving on that core as we have been doing always, right? And I just like how this whole world is interlinked, where we help each others with different
Yes.
skill sets at different times, right?
It
And
really is a
together we
community.
build something, right?
Yes, I really feel that community aspect as
Mm,
well. Like,
mm,
I see it on the loose album. With Ran, I remember Bell and Harold coming in, listening in.
mm,
It was like, this can use some Harold on guitar, and
yeah.
no questions asked. He was so
Mm,
happy and
mm,
really bringing that groove on the track.
mm,
And it's really like it's so simple, but it's at the same time maybe the most important aspect of keeping this community alive. It's
mm,
not in a sense to want to gatekeep anything, but to understand this is a living and breathing community, an
mm,
entity of sorts on its own. And
mm,
that is also inspiring each other, or doing Himmelbleef Sword on the spot, which
mm,
was a really
yeah.
fun experience, or and giving some tips.
Mm,
Where can you buy a good drum, or stuff like that,
mm,
because that's also keeping it alive. It's in that sense also a little bit still an oral tradition that's living there. Just talk
mm,
with each other, dare to ask a question and dare to learn from each other. I love that about this Nordic community in music.
mm. And
um
also
yeah,
like if you look at it, if you look at folk, what is folk? Folk
yeah,
means music for the people, right?
yeah,
And folk is kind of where we have our backbone. I don't claim us to be 100% folk, and I don't claim us to be anything really. But what I do think is that if you look also even further back, like when I did Valravn and stuff like that, which you also guested several times on your Nyckelharper. Um, I think we are looking at maybe folk shouldn't be something from a dusty book that you take down from a shelf, right?
yeah,
And you only can recreate something as it probably was at one time. No,
yeah,
folk is something that is alive today and
yes,
something we can develop further, and that will be folk in the future, maybe, right? And
exactly,
keeping it alive, making folk music
yeah,
needs folks, right? It
yes,
needs a community, right?
yeah,
That is relevant for today.
yeah.
And I think that is the energy I like working with this kind of thing, and definitely as with all the guests that is on your stuff is
Hmm.
also a testimony to that.
Yeah, it for me, it also even feels like touching base sometimes with the country. Yeah, because or like respecting that I'm singing in the language of another country. Like for example with Icelandic song, I'm a Dutch artist. Of course we can try and aim to sing in Icelandic, but for me it's also about the energy of connecting to that country by working with
Mm,
locals. Like on one of the singles we did, Under Mein Beat, on my later album,
mm,
Saula, really going to the area, recording
mm,
in the nature, and
very
having
important.
that sort of almost like energetic binding between me as a visitor, giving respect to that country's origins, but
Mm,
also at the same time building on the expansion of that folk community.
yeah,
Let's do this
yeah,
together. I'm
yeah.
coming to your country, I'm
We do
singing your
exactly the
language.
same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, let's bring it,
Mm,
build a bridge together in through
mm.
art, through music, through beauty. That's my mission when I do these kind of things. And yours.
Yeah, I think that we are agreeing a lot. We of course work a lot with native communities and
Yeah.
try
Yeah.
gather funds and stuff to preserve natural environments and
Yes.
communities all around the planet, right?
Yes.
Because I believe that world music is, some people don't like the expression. I do like the
Mm.
expression world music because it's music from the world, and it becomes folk music when you are local, right? I think it's easy, you know. I have nothing against that expression, but I really do believe that the world is connected through folk music, and this whole
Yes.
idea that no matter where you go in the world, of course they will have a local folklore, as you also say you're connecting with, right? But it's usually the same thematics in some way, you know, like we also see it when we go back in history that instruments become the same thing. Drawings, stories have similar human aspects that more or less become the same thing. And that's why it's in a very real way, when you look very deep into your own culture and your own heritage and wherever you're coming from on the planet, you will figure out that the further you reaches into yourself, the more you're actually reaching out to everyone else, because you are going to figure out that you are identical to
I
everyone else.
love that analogy. It's really, yeah.
And that is what you do when
Yeah.
you do your stuff, Kati. That is what you do when you make that, also on Blodbølge, where you know, you have the more morbid side of things, which I also of course like personally,
Love that.
and you
Yeah.
reach out to Gal and have him sing on your stuff, right?
Yes.
Which is
Yes.
really fitting also energetically of the energy of that
Yes.
piece you are trying to
Yeah.
tell a story with, right?
Yes.
And that is, of course, two very different voices. You are
Yeah.
coming from a country that is relatively flat. He comes from a country that
Yeah.
is very tall, right?
Yeah.
But the energy and the humanity, how you react to your local environment,
Yeah.
is the same. It's
Yeah.
just, you know, we are on a round ball after all, very far away from anything, right? And we
Absolutely.
are very in the grander scheme of things, even though it can seem bit different in once in a while. We can be very angry with people that we normally call friends or whatever. You know, we are actually not that different
Yeah.
compared to the grander scheme of things.
Absolutely. I mean, we all are, stuck on this globe together. Might as well make the
Mm,
best of it and
mm,
try to recognize also parts of yourself in another
mm,
for whatever reasoning or they
mm,
might have. Like, practice your empathy is really
mm,
important both ways. For
mm,
me, working with Gal or any other guest, it is really an energetic choice. Sometimes a little bit more unconsciously, sometimes very deliberately, like having Carl Sagan on Bukenhorn, the Norwegian
mm,
jazz legend, not only because he's a good player, but also because he is the one who carried that instrument back into contemporary music as one of
mm,
the first persons of that
mm.
generation.
Definitely.
It's so important to also kind of acknowledge that. And that brings me also back to that community feeling, being aware also, like
Mm,
there have been people who have built pathways before
mm.
you. And so,
And I also really love how you know, instruments have a tendency to develop into something completely new, right? But
yes.
you see, it's maybe a long story, but I will try to make it short.
Okay.
But one thing I really like is, for instance, how the different types of small harps has found its way into modern history music, or whatever you can call it, right?
Yeah.
Because I definitely believe most of them was just souvenirs that you would take home with you and hang on the wall, right? Because they don't really sound, and I mean, they don't sound like the nicer, you know, Persian harps or stuff
Yeah.
like that at all,
Yeah.
right? And definitely for Persian travelers, listening to that as music would have been, you know, maybe interesting, right? At least if you hear how they describe the meetings with them at Volga, and also up here in what is nowadays northern Germany.
Yeah.
But my point is, you know, it becomes like this carrying things in many bands, you know, to have all these different things, and there's a new life brought into a thing, an intention, right? And you see the same thing in these living history markets or reenactment markets that we also have traveled together, right? That people live in these like glamping style Viking tents with everything and coolers in their Viking chests and everything. There's nothing authentic about it. You definitely need a Volvo or whatever to transport your whole thing around, and it would never in anywhere near back in the day be able to
Survive.
you know to travel like that. That would be
Yeah.
insane, right? You would need
Yeah.
an army of slaves, right?
Yeah.
And I think that would be rare to do it like that.
Yeah.
Completely unauthentic. But what it is there's an authentic intention in it, right? Like
Yeah.
intenting people, celebrating, what tastes like maybe the
Yes.
past, right?
Yeah.
And you see that in music. And my what I've always trying to advocate for in anything is that none of this that is happening is in any way how it probably were back then. None
Yes.
of it.
Mm.
What we are doing here is not recreating anything. You know,
Mm.
there's none that is knowing more about a certain spell or any development of an 18th century Icelandic symbol. There's nothing Viking about it. There's not even a thing that was Viking. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
What matters is what is it you are telling of a story? What is it to you, and what is it you wanna make good with it, right? And stop trying to go the Christian route and claiming that you have, the real truth in front of you here, and you're the only one. No one is like that. And we only have each other, and we have our art, and with that we can do a lot of good. But I do like how some of the more, probably souvenirs from back then has found its way into being the new, symbol of real music. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Okay, these are like such beautiful words. I think they're like really good to close this chat on, because the last question was to you, what inspire your music as a whole, and how do you find ways to keep things interesting and fresh after working on music over the years by Ellen Jane Kruger?
Mm.
I think that actually really summarizes
People.
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Having that connection, staying in connection with each other, being open-minded, exactly, not
Yes.
preaching anything, like not creating new dogmas into the scene,
E-
but
Even though it can seem like shit once in a while, and it has been doing so countless times through history, we are people, and there is beauty in there for
yeah.
sure.
All right. Thank you so much for this like super amazing talk. For
Thank you.
this yeah, kind of look back and everything else that we came up with. I think you've worded things so beautifully. And
And you should come to my studio again. I can show you a couple of things we can do with what you already made just for fun.
oh yes, okay, I will love to. I'm gonna take you up on that invitation for certain, now that you have a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more free time coming in the coming
Mm-hmm.
periods.
Yeah,
So I will
make something fun.
we'll make something fun, and
Yeah.
thank you again.
Immerse ourselves into the whole thing.
Yeah. All right. I'm definitely in. Thank you
Mm.
so much. Have a
Awesome.
beautiful tour after this, and a
Yeah, thank
beautiful
you.
off day. All right. Bye.
Take good care, Ken. Bye.
Bye.